viewing this webinar, those who are interested in the Guyanese economy, to work with the chamber that has been established, but also look at the respective partnerships and opportunities within the Guyanese economy with other agencies that have been established here, whether those are the private sector organizations, and we have a host of them, ranging from the most prominent one being the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Private Sector Commission and other related organizations, and also our own local content secretariat. Because what we are looking to do here is the measurement of the three key areas that we have outlined in the policy and in the law. That is, we want to build the employment of Guyanese and related services. We want to build local capacity, such as institutions and businesses. And we also want to ensure that the procurement of goods and services, not only for the direct approach of the oil and gas sector, but the indirect approach, which can be adhered to the agriculture sector or the services sector as it relates to mining or the hospitality, or as it relates to the provision of key services that allows for the maintenance and the production of goods and services that are needed for the oil and gas sector. And Ghana has an impactful track record that have shown that their approach was pretty much based on their ability to learn very quickly. So the learning curve that Ghana had established from the time of 2007 to where they are now, and Guyana looking to build on our learning curve from 2015 to where we are now, we want to see the contribution of the oil and gas sector continues in a way that can propel the economy. So we all know the statistics. If you don't know, I can repeat them very quickly for you. To date, we have about 45 discoveries in the Stabroek Block. There are a few which were not deemed highly effective, but the ones that has the potential for commercial discovery is about 45 in the entire offshore operation. Now, and you are looking at an economy that is expected to produce over 1 million barrels of oil by 2027 into 2028. You're looking at the economy that is now about 15 to 16 billion US dollar as it relates to the GDP. This was an economy back in less than 4 years ago, was seen as a $4 billion economy. Now you're looking at the 15 to 16 billion US dollar economy as measured by the GDP. The growth rate of the economy must be reflected in terms of the business activities that are presented here. So our focus is to engage our local content approach and re-engage it continuously over time. One of the lessons that we learned in Ghana is that you must continuously engage the business community, and you must continuously look at how you can put measures in place to allow for other growth sectors that are popping up over time within the economy. And for example, one of that is, while we have been primarily been on the crude operation, Guyana is now going to be focusing on the development of natural gas. We have a major project which is going to allow for the development of a pipeline and the operation of electricity and NGL facility that allow for NGL products that will come on stream at the end of 2024 into 2025. Now, these are new sectors to the Guyanese economy again, and we need to understand that at the local stage, regional stage, as well as the international market approach on the development of our natural gas sector. There are a host of opportunities that are already in place here as it relates to construction and services for natural gas, but we also have to develop the market for it very significantly, as we want to see that as a thriving industry over the next 5 years. So the entire development of the petroleum sector and the hydrocarbons industry in Guyana is one in which we want to take the principles of local content and adapt it to that area of approach, and then bring it back down to the economy itself. When we started the development of the local content policy into the law and into the establishment of the secretariat, we maintained the focus of the linkage of local content and the oil and gas sector back to the general economy. And this is where we're talking about the partnerships, joint ventures, and collaboration. Here's where we're talking about the forward and backward linkages within the economy and outside of the economy, as well as the lateral linkages of the fiscal resources that can be invested and reinvested. So we look forward to the continuous partnership with Ghana as a whole, with the government, with the chamber that has been established. The minister wanted to reiterate the point that we will always push for more effective private sector collaboration, especially for the development of the oil and gas industry. So it is very important that whilst we as the government will provide that suitable enabling environment, such as collaboration with the Petroleum Commission and the local content office in Ghana, and likewise the ministry here and our local content office in Guyana, we want to make sure that there are synergies between the approach, the growth, and the objectives between the chamber that has been established to provide that linkage and experience from Ghana and bring it to Guyana where necessary. And there are synergies as well as joint ventures, partnership, collaboration, and a inclusive approach to the growth of both economies. So on behalf of the minister, I wanted to say thank you for allowing us to give this opening remark to the webinar, and we'll be part of the roundtable discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bobby. So very strong focus on local content, which we all know is the way to go. And we continue to learn from each other through such fora, like webinars like these. And we would go more into that discussion once we start the panel discussion. It'll be interesting to hear more about how the establishment of backward and forward linkages is helping the growth of the economy in Guyana. So from that, ladies and gentlemen, we've just heard this morning from the public sector in Ghana and then in Guyana. We're taking it to the private sector now. And like I mentioned before, we have two big players in the industry in Guyana joining us. First, I'll introduce Professor Suresh Nareen, who is the executive co-chairman of CGX Energy Incorporated. CGX is a publicly traded Canadian oil and gas exploration company that holds an interest in the Corentyne block in the Guyana Basin. And for the next few minutes, Professor Suresh would be telling us a bit about CGX's project offshore Guyana. Professor, we're happy to have you.
Thank you, Nana. Happy to be here. I think protocols have been well observed, but permit me to again recognize and thank my fellow speakers and panelists, Dr. Fidel from the Petroleum Commission, Dr. Gosai from the Ministry of Natural Resources, and Nicholas Pegu from Vredenhoek Ports. And also permit me to thank Gabby for his leadership in helping to put all of this together. I think the theme here is local content, and Ghana, of course, is well known, very well known to Guyanese, if only sometimes because we often when we say we're from Guyana, people ask, where's that in Africa? Our names are so similar that Ghana and Guyana are often confused. But the similarities, of course, do not end there. We share a common heritage, and we have very similar cultural traits. We're both ex-British colonies, and we both have always subscribed to the British common law system. This is very important when we look at collaborations. Before I give you a few comments about my thoughts about local content, a little bit about CGX. We are in the context of a very new producing basin, probably the grandfather of the basin, but a very tiny grandfather. We started exploring this basin back in 1997. We have explored onshore as well as offshore. And we're very grateful that over that period of probably spending more than $1 billion US, that we now have two discoveries under our belt, are now in the phase of looking at what our appraisal and development programs could look like. and further evaluating our commerciality. In addition to being an explorer in the basin, we've also invested in a deep water port, which is well on its way to completion on the Berbice River. So we are quite deeply embedded within the Guyana petroleum story and have struggled like most small companies would in an emerging frontier basin with all of the things that any new entrance to this basin needs to be aware of. So back in 2005, 2006, when we were drilling, there was no local content legislation. And so we learned very quickly that local content makes economic sense. It makes community sense. And it is crucial, if not pivotal, to your ability to successfully operate in a locality. So long before there was regulation, we spent a tremendous amount of effort in training Guyanese who could then supply us with services and with labor. Long before that legislation existed, we recognized some of the significant challenges that come with engaging and working with local content, with the tremendous benefits, not just economic, but as I said, cultural and community-based. Local content for us revolves on a tripod of factors. I would put at the top, at the most important tripod being cultural, what I call cultural intelligence, understanding the nature of the environment and communities, and cultural underpinnings and mores that exist in a community. And if those then can be paired with the right skill sets, and then the next important tripod, the right models for financing, I think local content can very easily welcome the involvement of skilled players from Ghana that obviously have been involved in the sector long before Guyanese have been. And as I said, Ghana brings with it a cultural similarity, a legal similarity, and a shared heritage. So I think it's very pregnant when you think of local content and Ghanaian opportunities. In the local, as we move past our exploration phase into our appraisal and hopefully development phase, our need for services are also changing. And so it's of beyond my hat as a Guyanese, there's also the hat I wear as a corporate player. It is very important for us to continue to see local ability, local provisions of services climb up that ladder. And as our needs change, when you're doing exploration, you have a tremendous amount of activity whilst you're drilling a well. We just finished drilling a well, nearly $200 million. Most of those dollars goes into services. And if those services are offered locally, they're multiply blessed. They're multiply blessed because, I'm sorry, my hearing another, okay. If those services are provided locally, they're multiply blessed. They bring with them an ability to access those services rapidly without the required travel time and logistical challenges if you are accessing services offshore. They bring with them the ability to seek synergies and innovation for inefficiencies because you are located right across the road from each other. They clearly bring with them the rising tide lifts all boats effect, where your theater of activity has a significant amount of like-minded people who are economically progressive, and that leads to the concomitant gains in safety, efficiencies, regulatory processes, etc. I couldn't obviously go on and on about why being able to source these services locally are good for operators, but I think you get the drift. So for us as an operator, seeing local content climb up the value chain is extremely important. I think Dr. Gosai would have touched on this as well. Local content cannot, at the stage it is in Guyana, realize its full potential without the right partnerships. We are a very, very fresh country on the petroleum scene. So we lack, in many cases, the skill set and the finance. So I want to challenge those in Ghana that hopefully are excited about the opportunities to partner with our local content. So not only think of bringing skill sets and technical know-how, we do have a requirement in Guyana for a certain level of ownership. You will find, in some cases, very enthusiastic local players who does need help on the skill set side, but also require the right kinds of financing that will allow them to own 50 or 51% of your joint ventures. So your entrance in the country is not only your know-how and your cultural attunement, it's also your ability to bring creative financing. And if creative financing can be part of the package, you will find that local content joint venture opportunities will abound. So that's an important aspect of this. Of course, in the local content landscape, there are several tiers that offer themselves. And as you climb up those tiers from a skill set perspective, you also climb up those tiers from a capital requirement perspective. At the basic level of local content, of course, you have the supply of fairly unskilled labor, you have the supply of housing, and you may have the supply of things like food, beverages, entertainment services, transportation services, logistical services. If you do, and we have just done an analysis of where the highest costs were on our last well, you will note that those services, whilst important and do provide significant opportunities, are also the lowest rung of the economic return ladder. As you climb up in sophistication, the margins of profit that you make, and you know this very well, will increase. So I think that this workshop's perhaps a good start, but we need a forum where matchmaking between your service providers and our local content interested businesses can truly engage in intimate discussions about what those opportunities are. I mean, as you move up the tier, the very next tier, and Nicholas will speak to this, I will speak to it a little bit in the panel as well, is providing shore-based opportunities, which gets you up the specialized rung in terms of climbing up the ladder. Beyond shore-based activities, there are also ship-to-shore, rig-to-shore opportunities in terms of supply vessels. There are tremendous opportunities in the safety side of the equation. And of course, there are tremendous opportunities in the supply of materials and skilled services, all the way from addressing casings to specialized services on cement and mud, to providing specialized machine services and lubrication services, specialized medical services. The list goes on, and any of the operators, ourselves included, would be very happy to sit down with local content, as we do regularly, and talk about the opportunities, not just what we can offer local content now, But if they are to prepare with partners like yourselves to access those higher tier opportunities, what kinds of business quanta, frequency, and stability can operators offer? And I dare to speak for all the operators in country to say that we are all extremely interested in this. So thank you for letting me speak briefly. I really appreciate the fact that you have more than 200 people on this call. And I think I'd like to join Dr. Gosai and say, Guyana is open for business. We are very interested in partnership. And we are very excited about Ghana's partnership, again, because of those similarities and the efforts that you've made to tell us that you are also interested. So with those few remarks, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Suresh. Very deep insights. And indeed, it's evident that Professor Suresh and CGX have been working in the petroleum industry in Guyana for a very long time, since the late 90s. It is interesting to hear you speak about what you've been doing to build local capacity way before production began in Guyana and before the Local Content Act. So we'll be speaking some more about these things on the panel. But before then, I'll bring on our next speaker to make his presentation. And that is Mr. Nicholas Deyu Boya. Nicholas is a founder of Guyana Oil and Gas Support Services Incorporated, and he's a director of several companies in Guyana, including National Hardware Guyana Limited. He previously served as the president of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry and was the chairman of the Private Sector Commission of Guyana from 2020 to 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, I have summarized our speakers' profiles because we shared them earlier, and in the interest of time, I haven't been able to read out all the extensive profiles of the distinguished speakers that we have here. Nicholas, we really appreciate you joining us. Please take it on.
Thank you, Nana. And with the protocols being established already, I'd say greetings to fellow speakers and the organizers, to Gabby, the director of the Guyana Chamber of Commerce, Guyana. And what I'm going to do this morning in my introduction opening remarks is use a visual aid just to weave the story of the particular project that I'm part of in the oil and gas industry and weave that into the topic of the discussion today, which is the opportunities in the upstream petroleum sector in Guyana, as well as the opportunities for expanding local content, building on Ghanaian capacity and using that to build Guyanese capacity. So if you permit me to share screen, 1 second. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. So this is a very short presentation, and it discusses the project that we call the Vredenhoek Shore Base. And again, through it, I'm going to use it as a way of building on the opportunities in Guyana and the way in which we see local content developing. Now, one of the key things about the Guyanese industry is that right now it's an offshore oil and gas industry, and therefore infrastructure plays a big role in allowing the participation of local content. Because if you don't have good port access, it's hard to participate in an offshore industry. And so that's why, as a local, one of the first and key areas we looked at in investing was the infrastructure that was necessary. Because, as many panelists have described, Guyana has not had a huge history of oil and gas production. Since the 1960s, there have been trials at exploration. Professor Narayan, and CGX are what we call the pioneers of the offshore oil and gas industry. And then in 2015, ExxonMobil found, first find. So for us, this was one of the key areas of opportunity. And as you, the attendees, look at the Guyana market, I encourage you to start first with some of the primary needs, which is going to be infrastructure. Now, in our particular business and our business model, 3 local families came together to form NRG Holdings, because the size of project that we were going after was significant for each of the individual companies by themselves. And we started to work with Yandino, which is a very large civil and marine contractor. I think they've done some work at the port of Takoradi in Ghana, for instance. And we worked with Yandino to come up with a very large concept we call the Port of Freedom. So the local families involved are, myself and my dad. So we're the Daegu family. We have Andron, Ronaldo, and Afro Alfonso. Their core business is agriculture and mining. And then we have Mr. Nazar Mohammed and his son Azzedine Mohammed. Their core business is gold trading. And so we came together to form the NRG consortium. Now, NRG acquired a lease from the government of Guyana for about 600-700 acres offshore at the mouth of the Demerara River in Guyana. So the capital city is on the east bank of the Demerara River, the capital city being Georgetown, and we acquired this lease on the west bank. Now, together with Yandino, we conceptualized this master concept, the Port of Redenhoop, and then more specifically, ExxonMobil, and as Professor Narayan had mentioned earlier, they had a huge need for another base. Now, for them, it was particularly a project base or a surf base, subsea umbilicals, risers, and flowline base. So an area where they could store their subsea equipment that they used in the project installations. And so they came out to tender, and we shifted our focus, or what I'd say is we went after this tender because the way Exxon designed it, they were offering some cash up front to assist in the development, because again, the economy of Guyana pre-oil was, maybe let's say about 3 billion to 5 billion in size. And some of these projects, because the tagline on our project is about 300 million, it's hard for us to use financing from just within the Guyanese economy to fund these projects. So it was worthwhile for us to go after this project from Exxon. And in 2022, April, we were successful at that tender and signed a lease with ExxonMobil. As part of a project, we had to open up the mouth of the Demerara River and the shipping channel that is there in order to achieve the timeline set by Exxon for us to deliver our project. This was done, let's say, at the cost of the project, not any cost to government or the client. And this was a huge undertaking by us. We were very proud of it, though, because now the shipping channel of Guyana was about 70 meters wide and about 6 meters deep. Post, it's about 100 meters wide and it's about 9 meters deep at lowest astronomical tide. And the reason this was done was to facilitate the type of equipment we needed in constructing the project. In around November, December of 2022, the Yandino, our contractor, our partner and contractor, mobilized the Galileo Galilei trailing suction hopper dredge. And that dredge was used to reclaim the island that we've built so far that will become the base for Exxon. This is a photo of the island to date and currently still in construction. We expect to deliver the first phase of that island in December 15th of this year. So the island will be, the entire project is delivered in 3 phases. First phase being December 15th, second phase being March 30th, and the final phase, so December 15, 2023, March 30th, 2024, and the final phase being handed over at the end of 2024. So in and around December 2024. So the key for the audience is opportunities. And so one of the key things that we have done is that we put out a request for responses to or expressions of interest for about 90 some areas of service opportunities for when the base is in operation. Those areas can be found on either the Center for Local Business Development's website and our own Port of Green Hoop website. So we have it on, we've been using Facebook because in Guyana, Facebook has been a very popular means of disseminating information. It's very, widely used amongst the population here. So if you check out our Facebook pages, you'll see those opportunities. But you're also free to reach out to myself, post for any questions that you may have on the opportunities. Now, just to explain a little bit about the structure of the business. So we're building this island, and then we essentially have leased that island to Exxon. Now, Exxon is going to perform work on this island. So again, they're going to store their subsea materials. They're going to perform some fabrication of the subsea equipment, and they have some additional plans outside of those. And so they have put out they together with us in conceptualizing the services that they will need, thought about these 90 areas. And so key for us is that there is growing capacity in Guyana, but it's not where we need it to be, especially given the timelines of this project. And so for the attendees of this webinar, your opportunity is really to look for collaboration with Guyanese companies or Guyanese entrepreneurs and to form partnerships with them where you are providing intellectual property, your intellectual property, which is your business processes, methods of performing work that you have developed, and what your Guyanese partner will be bringing to the table is the opportunity for the market. There is a local content law that is in place in Guyana. It was modeled after the local content law in Ghana. When I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, we were very active in lobbying for that law. The law protects a certain number of sectors, or let's call them subsectors within the petroleum industry. And currently, the Ministry of Natural Resources is reviewing those sectors because they've noticed the growth in capacity in Guyana and they're expanding on those. So that creates an impetus for partnering with Guyanese firms. But I can tell you that I've spoken to a lot of companies who have partnered with Guyanese firms outside of the areas defined by the law, and they found that it was beneficial to them because it reduced their cost of setup. It decreased the amount of time it took the firm from, let's say, putting up a signpost to acquiring a first contract. And it also allowed the firm to quickly understand Guyanese regulations, Guyanese law, and Guyanese nuances, so that they didn't have to go through those learnings, and albeit sometimes painfully if you're on the wrong side of let's say, the regulation or the laws of Guyana. So there have been great opportunities for collaboration outside of what was just required statutorily. So speaking a little bit more about our base and our vision and, kind of framing conversation, the area, let me see if I can annotate, sorry. So the area that we are building for Exxon is the southern area. You see an access road here that leads into the base from the shore. And the area south of that access road is what will be built for Exxon. The area north of that access road is what we conceptualize for the future in the master plan of the port, which includes commercial shipping cargo, break bulk shipping. Also, we conceptualize a tank farm and an industrial area. So those are our goals, let's say, to grow the project into. And so, for firms who provide services related to, this, we're always open to working and partnering. And, there are many other companies who are potential providers of services that, you may fit. So you may fit working with us directly, or you may fit working with us indirectly by finding a Guyanese partner who can provide a service to us. One of the key things, in our project was our engagement with the community, both from what was required by our permitting as well as what was done in our CSR. And pardon the text, I'm using Apple's Keynote, so it changed the font a little bit. But the key piece to take away here is that one of the things that we found in Guyana working, so where most of the organizations that are investing in this port are based in and around the capital city, and we were moving to do this project across the river. And we found that we had to win over the hearts and minds of the local community. And this is something very important about local content. It's that in Guyana, because of the economy we've had, and because you have this new industry, there's a lot of attention placed on this industry. So it's very important to understand the concept of the social license to operate. And that social license is something that in doing business, we, very honestly, did not pay attention to at first, but as we built our relationship with the community, as we went through processes of engagement with the community, we became more and more understanding of how important that social license is. And what that has helped us to do is to create a win-win environment, both for the company as well as for the community. We have opened up, let's say, potential career opportunities for members of the community. We've opened up engagements for suppliers and vendors within the community. And this has endeared the community to us and has given us their buy-in that they are interested in seeing the project progress. And it's the same opportunity for local content. One of the key things about local content is remembering that this is Guyanese oil. It's a Guyanese opportunity. Therefore, we've seen firms come in from other areas trying to skirt around the local content. And it has ended very badly for them. Some of whom were, let's say, they had significant contracts, and as a result of their approach to local content, are losing those contracts. So therefore, to build a sustainable business model, local content is going to be quite important for you. Here's a short video play on the project as it stands right now. gas.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicholas. Thank you for showing us your project and for those insights, for drawing out again for us those opportunities, which I'm very sure that the attendees are paying great attention to. And then also that connection between sustainability and local content, we cannot overemphasize that. So thank you for that. And on that powerful note, we would head straight into our panel discussion. Like I said, all 4 speakers would be joining me in that discussion, but I'd like to start with Professor Suresh because he has very limited time and he would have to leave us at a point. So I would start off with him. I'd ask him 2 questions so that he would be able to go off if he has to. Professor Suresh, so according to the Economic Commission for Latin America and Caribbean, in its latest report on FDI, Guyana is well on its way to becoming the 4th largest offshore producer in the world. And that will put Guyana ahead of countries like the USA, Mexico, and Norway. So it looks like very exciting times in Guyana. You've spoken about the opportunities. So, and Nicholas has also touched on that. So I wouldn't ask you to talk more on that, but I'd like you to bring out what have been some challenges that you faced. What should players who are looking to invest and work in the petroleum sector in Guyana prepare themselves for, and what advice would you give?
Thanks for that. Yes, Nana, we meet with a tremendous number of people from offshore wanting to locate in Guyana because of the pregnant opportunities that you referred to. Those are some astronomical numbers by any measure. So naturally, many people are interested. The challenge we face is that many of those companies are seeking to secure contracts before even establishing in country. Many of them are seeking supply agreements without having a presence. Many, for example, helicopter companies come and meet with us without having a single machine in country. And so what is necessary if those numbers that you quoted are enticing enough, there is an onus on those investors to take the risk to partner properly in country and have presence. It's very difficult for the operators to continue to discuss with potential what ifs. If the numbers, and the numbers are convincing by any international measure, if they're convincing enough and they present a fertile opportunity for companies in Ghana, my advice to you is be present on the ground. Very few companies are able to give you any contracts on spec. And you will lose out to those configurations that are already on the ground. Even if many companies can promise better economic services, cheaper services, invariably operators will go with the services that they can rely on. When you're drilling offshore, today's rig prices, generally every 24 hours will cost between $1 million and $1.5 million US. You want your services to be close to you. You want to know that they have the capacity on the ground. You don't want to have a relationship with an oil spill response company that has to mobilize from across the Atlantic. You want to make sure that they've got inventory in country. So that's the key for me in business partnerships, is get on the ground, have this visibility, make those commitments to that will require investment. It will require upfront investment in order to take advantage of the opportunities.
Great advice, and you heard it. There can be very little reward without risk. So put your best foot forward, put some skin in the game, and then we can begin to talk business. So thank you for that. Next question I have for you is on local content specifically. Frontera Energy Corporation, which is your JV partner to CGX, is a wholly owned Canadian entity. And you were in existence before the coming of the Act. How has the coming of the Local Content Act impacted your operations, and what have you had to do to be compliant?
So the operatorship and investment in blocks are not a requirement for 100% ownership or 50% ownership in Guyana. I think that the government has been quite wise in recognizing that the Local Content Act applies not to ownership of concessions on block. We have to be careful in the nomenclature, because when two companies own or 5 or 10 companies own a concession, they own the ability to work that concession, but the block continues to belong to the government and people of Guyana. So the allocation of concessions to companies are not restricted to the current local content legislation. However, government in its latest bid round has been quite prescient to begin to expand that envelope in allocating specific depths of blocks offshore that are first opened and encouraged to be held by local content. So presumably, as local content, knowledge, and investment capabilities continue to increase and improve, I hope we will see in the future that the holding of concessions will be allocated in some preferential way to local content. And as I said, we are beginning to see that in the information released on the latest bid round. However, currently, the fact that both Frontera and CGX, joint venture partners on the quarantine block, are holders of the block's concession is not subject to the Local Content Act. What is, however, subject to the Local Content Act is that our activities are required to obey, and we have so far actually quite exceeded it, the requirements for bidding within the local environment. And if a local company is able to offer services, we are constrained to work with that local company, obviously within the guidelines of ensuring that they can offer the services effectively and that they are economically competitive. But most of the Local Content Act does not refer to ownership of concessions. They refer to being able to give local companies a preferential access to offering those services. And to complete my answers, we have not found it difficult to comply with the Act at all. What we found difficult actually is finding more local providers for services that we would have gladly offered in the country. So in fact, as I said, I think in my opening remarks, operators finds it much, much more convenient, ultimately more inexpensive, and ultimately more self-serving, to be quite honest, to operate within a local environment. If you have most of your people residing in a locale, then it's healthy to source most of your activities from that locale. It makes eminent sense. So we would like to see the number of service providers for local content grow. I don't think any of the operators have found the local content legislation draconian in any way. because they're seeking it for the synergies that comes.
Great. Thanks again for that. I'd like to take it from the private sector and then move right on to.
Can I be forgiven for leaving? Sorry for interrupting. I'm sure you're in very capable hands of Nicholas and Bobby, but I so apologize. I had another meeting, and I mean no disrespect, but please forgive me.
We do understand, Professor. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and staying on up till this time. It's been very insightful. Thank you so much. So, Bobby, I'd like to come to you and to ask, for a year and a half into the implementation of the Local Content Act, the Attorney General of Guyana recently announced that Guyana is looking to review and make some amendments to the act. I'd like to ask, what has been the experience so far? What are the lessons learned, and what is causing this review at this early stage? What should we expect?
Right. Thank you, Nana. And coming off from what Professor Narayan would have mentioned, especially for the oil and gas operators, there is no constraint on their partnership because, as you heard from both Nicholas as well as Professor Narayan's presentation, access to capital and financing availability in Guyana is one of our biggest constraints. We encourage investors to come to Guyana, especially those who can bring the necessary capital investment, hence local content and our continuous mantra of promoting business opportunities and business growth. What we found in 2022, from the time that the law was put into effect, is that there was a concern in terms of the interpretation of certain conditions that were settled in the law. We have a definitional issue that was raised. That was one of our biggest concerns and challenges that we had with the law itself, and that is to define a Guyanese citizen and to define a Guyanese business, which we have within our constitution and we have within the respective investment laws, as well as applicable economic opportunities regulation within the country. And this is a law that was now accounted for the oil and gas industry, a new industry. And one of our biggest challenge was to determine, in terms of an interpretation manner, the heritage line of a Guyanese. And we saw that challenge coming up very, very quickly in 2022. In fact, the matter was carried to the court, a decision was made, and the government understood that decision at that time. But that wasn't the only challenge that we had in terms of businesses. What we had is we found that because there was a requirement, and this was a effective policy decision on the government, is to ensure that we had this law in place to allow the indigenous industries to have the opportunity to grow. And we had to define properly partnerships, roles of partnerships and roles of joint ventures. And part of that challenge, as well as a learning curve, was to understand how businesses on paper, for example, would present themselves. In Guyana, for example, you can register a business. As long as you continue to register the name, you hold it. It could be sole trader, partnership, incorporated company, NGO, whatever it is. However, what we found is that there were some cases where there were external investors who wanted to come into Guyana, but they weren't going through the right channels. They were seeking to present sort of what we would term as window dressing approach. They weren't on paper. It is one thing they were saying about the company, but in reality, it was a different approach. And we had to delve in to the actual details of companies. So it was a challenge for the Secretariat itself, a new Secretariat that was established to work with respective agencies, collaboration with other government agencies. So collaborating with the Revenue Authority, collaborating with the Deeds Registry, which would have the business names and company information, collaborating with the different organization that deals with labor participation to ensure that the workers that they're having are indeed Guyanese and have registered in Guyana and meet the requirement that we have here. To ensure that the directors that they would have on companies meet the requirement that we have in the local content law. So those were some of the challenges that we have to ensure that the company was in fact participating within the sector and wanted to acquire a local content certificate based on the requirement of a Guyanese company participating, Guyanese directors participating, as well as Guyanese employees participating. But point to note though, we outlined in that law 40 areas. The applicability of the law were only for those 40 areas if you wanted a local content certificate or you wanted to participate in those sectors and subsectors for economic opportunities. If the business or the services or the growth can be provided or is required or is demanded outside of those 40 areas, and there were no Guyanese companies that could provide them or no joint ventures or partnership that could provide them, then you can still apply and work in the oil and gas sector. The only difference is you would not be accounted for under the umbrella of local content. So this brought us to another challenge as well, measurement of local content. How do we determine who's contributed to local content and the drivers of local content and the linkages of local content as against those who were not? So participatory role within the 40 areas of above board companies and companies that were of the equitable approach to local content and those that were also participating but are not accounted for local content. So you had to differentiate between what was petroleum contribution to the economy in terms of local contribution, local content growth, local content role, as well as non-local content role. Because we had only defined within the law, or we have only defined within the law, 40 areas. And those 40 areas were highlighted, were presented, is in the first schedule of the law, because these were what we gathered from our consultations with the private sector there. To say that Guyana we have companies, we have individuals that are capable of providing this goods or this service, and the company well capable of providing for the oil and gas sector. There were some challenges to that theory as well. There were some areas in which we more than excel in reaching our target requirement, and there were some areas which we did not reach our target requirement in the sense that we were close to it or we were not too close to it. And, we tried to ensure that while we were measuring from the reports that were provided, that we determine exactly if we had excelled something or there was an area of business services or business physical products that we did not take into account, but those can be provided for within the new opportunities that may come beyond the amendment that we will put in place. So the Attorney General had indicated yes, and of course this statement was made public by both the Minister of Natural Resources as well as the President and the Vice President, that the law will be adjusted to include other areas, new opportunities, new areas that we've seen that have grown over the years. And by the end of 2022, it would reach a stage where these goods and services can be provided in country. And we will, of course, not only add new areas to the first schedule, but also amend the targets that we would have set originally back in 2021.
Great, Bobby. It's thanks for that. It's great to know that you are monitoring and very sensitive to these things, the challenges with the current law and all that, and making the changes as you go along is really the only way to grow and develop. Now, I would like, we've heard a lot about from the Guyanese perspective. I'd like to bring it home to Ghana as well, and to ask you, Egbert, on value addition. Ghana's local content and participation regulations has in Section 1 as one of the main purposes being to increase the capability and international competitiveness of domestic businesses. Now, 16 years after our own discovery of oil in Ghana, and after a lot of talk about the petrochemical industry and all that, I'd like to ask you, is Ghana well on its way to developing a petrochemical industry? And are there existing players who are able to scale up and provide services in other jurisdictions like Guyana?
Very much. And I'm glad for listening. Once again, let me thank you for the opportunity. As you rightly said, Ghana found credit in 2007, and then our first oil field being the 2050 Upstream in 2010. Since then, Ghana has practically brought on stream 2 additional oil fields. Now, specifically in relation to president on value addition and what we've done since Petroleum local participation regulations for 2013 gave us understands. And I'd like to observe specifically. We have, as far as the petrochemical aspect of our operations as a country is concerned, there's Ghana Gas, we also have the Petroleum Development Corporation that has come into existence and seriously looking for partners. Now, when you situate all the issues with respect to the chemical industry, in the context of what we are trying to do, I'll say that there have been giant strides that we have made.
Sorry to interrupt. If you can speak up a little bit, I think
okay, so
it's struggling to hear you.
So I was saying that Ghana has made some very giant strides as far as local content is concerned. When you use the petrochemical industry as a dashboard, the Ghana Gas example is an unassailable, let's say, plank that we have put out. But in relation to the upstream sector, I would say that yes, if you look at our experiences with the Jubilee 10 and Sankopadi fields, the role that indigenous Ghanaian companies and individual venture partners play in the field development and also the production phases in which we are, I tell you that the local content regulations have served Ghana well. However, just as our friends in Ghana are contemplating amendments to their laws, we have actually taken a step. This was sometime last year when the leadership of our minister, we caused amendments to our LI 2204 because traditionally LI 2204 only made provision for joint ventures as the only route by which foreign entities wanting to do business in Ghana to come in. However, we have, by way of the amendments, also introduced strategic alliances and channel partnerships as 2 other modes of contracting or entering our space to do business. Having said all this, I think that this webinar offers a fine opportunity for Ghanaian businesses, indigenous Ghanaian businesses and JVs to position themselves to partner with Guyanese companies to ensure that Ghana benefits from the experience and expertise of Ghanaians, from the range of competencies available in Ghana. I also want to add that when it comes to the area of technician training, Ghana is notches ahead. Looking at what we've done under the accelerated oil and gas capacity building program, where sometime last year we trained about 150 Ghanaian youth at the Jubilee Technical Training Center here in Prague to become mechanical technicians, instrumentation technicians, production technicians, and also I think electrical technicians. Because when you bring in these FPSOs, as Guyana is doing at the moment, in looking for the oil, the competencies are that yes, you need to have geologists, you need to have petroleum engineers and the rest. So that's like training doctors. But when the doctors are ready, what you need is an army of paramedics, so nurses, lab technologists and the rest to work with the doctors. So what we did in Ghana was we started off very well with these engineers and geologists and the rest. And then when we found the oil, all of a sudden we realized that we need technicians to work on the FPSOs and the drill ships and other applications. What were we going to get them from? We didn't have them because they need international certifications. They need all kinds of competencies, particularly the HSE. So on that sphere, I would say that companies in Ghana have assisted greatly in that area with some of the interventions that have come. Some of them, awesome, technique, Slumberjay, and if you can also Wayo Engineering and all these companies, a whole lot of them have actually localized and been able to work for our industry, producing all kinds of applications for our subsea production systems and also our self-arrangements. It is these kinds of advantages that Ghanaian companies can position to come to Guyana and hold hands with their Guyanese counterparts and actually introduce them to the pathways. Because in the end, it is indigenous Guyanese youth who will benefit from these trainings and lower the cost of production, because expatriates will not come in at great cost to the Guyanese. In very short, these are things that I'm looking for. The Petroleum Commission is looking for it to do with Guyana and its ministry and also the local content secretariat. And our doors are always open to facilitate this kind of interface to see what synergies we can bring from Ghana to Guyana.
Great. Thank you, Egbert, for bringing now those specific areas that Ghana has built expertise and which is ready to ship out to support Guyana. And the Petroleum Commission has been very instrumental in this collaboration between Ghana and Guyana. We're not doing too well for time, so I'll speed this up, but I'll come to you, Nicholas, with a question. I've noticed that our attendees have also sent their questions and would have to go to that. So I'll ask a last question of Nicholas, and then we can go to that. Nicholas, you're in the private sector now, but because of your previous role in the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I'm going to ask you this. How investor-friendly is Guyana? I'd like you to speak to our participants who are looking to come and visit Guyana and do business and all that. Tell us all about it.
Thanks for that question. So Guyana is very investor-friendly. So for instance, we hold no, let's say, prohibitions for foreigners registering companies here, owning assets in Guyana. Foreigners are allowed to buy assets. We have no currency control restrictions. So profits that you make in Guyana can be repatriated to the home company. You can trade, for foreigners, you can trade in foreign currency if necessary. So as a foreign company looking to make foreign direct investment into Guyana, there's very little restricting you from investing into Guyana, earning a profit in Guyana, and repatriating that profit back to home country, which, let's say, just for example, could be Accra in Ghana. So it's very investor friendly, and especially, our laws are based on English law. So, a lot of the case history, legal system type are based on English law. So it makes it very easy for yourselves to understand the rule and regulations in doing business in Guyana from a legal perspective, legal practitioner's perspective. So all of these factors, I think, make it easy to do business in Guyana. Our main language, is English. And so contracts and everything will be, expected to be done in English. So I think that's helpful. And in terms of being able to move people in and out of Guyana, we have flights to several major hubs. So the US, you have a lot of flights to Miami, New York, in Canada to Toronto, in Latin America to Panama, within the Caribbean to Barbados, and recently in Europe, in the UK, we have direct flights to London now. So that means that the movement of people into and out of the country has become easier and is getting more and more easier. And for major ports, currently the main port is the Port of Georgetown, and there are quite a few sailings for moving goods out of places. Let's say southern US is this main hub, as well as Panama, where cargo is aggregated either from Asia, for other regions in Latin America, and down. So, definitely Guyana is a very easy jurisdiction for you to enter into and to start to do business in.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure our listeners are happy to hear that. I know I said that we didn't have much time, so we're going straight into the Q&A, but we've been very lucky. We had advertised 4 speakers, but somehow we've been blessed with a 5th. As we've been in the middle of our webinar, we've been joined by the CEO of Ghana Gas, Dr. Ben Asante, and he's been attending this conference in Vancouver, where there's some interesting insights he would like to share with us briefly, and then we go into the Q&A. Dr. Ben Asante, thank you so much for this miraculous landing into our webinar. I think you're muted.
Yes, I'm muted now. Yes, I'll say thank you very much. It's actually about 7 o'clock, 7:20 thereabouts in Vancouver, but it's a real privilege to join you guys in this webinar. I think there are a few issues that have come up that I think will be of relevance to the discussion that we are having now. But if you would, I would just take a minute to go over some of the things that we have done in Ghana Gas. I know Egbert actually mentioned some, but just quickly, because I think it would set the stage for the discussion that we've had over or we're having in Vancouver. The first thing that we certainly are looking at or have looked at in Ghana in terms of the development framework for the oil and gas industry has been to make sure that we've got a good handle on our forecast when it comes to the supply and the demand. Now, the demand side, I heard a bit about, which is what are we doing with the gas? And certainly for Ghana, it's been almost about 85% of the gas being used for power generation, about 15% for non-power application. But looking to the future, and I know it was alluded to, we're looking at both the agricultural and certainly the petrochemical industries as well. So fertilizer production, even pesticides production, as well as in the petrochemicals, methanol, and all the things that we will need locally. Now, I also want to emphasize that now between the supply and the demand, we certainly are looking at the requisite infrastructure that will link the supply sources to the market. And that is really where the real beef is. Where do you get the financing for this infrastructure? I know the chain is very long. You're going from your upstream, midstream, and downstream. Your upstream, very capital intensive, midstream, and certainly downstream as well. But Ghana is looking at all these gates along the value chain to make sure that we make our resources count. But besides those plans, those supply, market, and infrastructure plans, one of the key things will be the drivers of these plans. Now, having gotten all these plans in place, how do you drive them? And the first thing that we look at are having the requisite institutional alignments. We've done that. The regulatory alignment, I mean, the Petroleum Commission certainly is key. And we're talking about both the technical and the financial regulation part. Then what has come up, even here in Vancouver, is financing, access to finance. How do you get that? Particularly in the phase of energy transition, and I'll come to that in a minute. Then I'll also add, from the local content perspective, capacity building, very critical. Now, it's easier said than done, but we need all hands on deck. I'm talking about academic institutions, subject matter experts, and the industry to be able to build the requisite capacity to sustain the industry going forward. Local content provision, we are glad that we have LI 2204 to guide us. But Nana, last but not the least, in terms of our framework, is the Gas Act. Not quite completed yet, but the Gas Act is what is going to add the legal impetus to all that I've talked about up front. And I think Ghana's industry certainly is a work in progress, but we've taken significant strides in making sure that our gas industry really is viable. I think one of the key things that we've done is the fact that we had to accelerate the capacity of our local engineers and technicians to take over operation of our gas processing plant and the associated pipelines. It took some countries quite a bit of time. I'm talking decades, 4 or 5 decades, but we were able to do this in about 4 years. And it is critical that Guyana looks at ways of actually accelerating, building capacity to be able to sustain the industry that you're looking at. Now, let me come to Vancouver. Beautiful city, I should say. It's an incredible city over here. But 2 things have come to mind here. And we're talking about energy transition. Now, it is in the vein of LNG and certainly gas, LNG. How do we advance trade in LNG and gas in the midst of this energy transition and a move towards decarbonization? 2 things. The transition, it's clear that there isn't a set date. Now, I've seen around Vancouver here that net zero is supposed to happen 2050. But then you listen to the speakers and some of us who are contributing to the discussion, it is very fluid, as the oil and gas are. The fuel type would be a consideration. So we're looking at coal in one sense, oil in one sense, and gas in another sense. Now, when we look at their atmospheric offensiveness in terms of carbon emission, they are very different. So natural gas certainly is the least offensive when it comes to how much CO2 it emits, then oil, and then coal. So it makes sense to some of us participants here that a transition for natural gas probably should be looked at differently as do oil and indeed coal. So naturally, coal will be the first to be transitioned in terms of the fossil fuels, and then oil, and then gas, just based on their carbon count. So that came out very clear that the transition from fossil fuels to renewables would not be just one-stop shop where all of the fossil fuels are being eliminated 2050, or in some cases, as some suggested in China, maybe 2070. The other issue that came up was the location. When we look at the Americas and Central America and indeed Europe and Asia, we see that per carbon count, and indeed when we look at their carbon footprint, much, much higher than those in South and Central America and in Africa. Now, the question then arose, do we all transition at the same time? So that was something that was also left unanswered. But if you ask me, I say that for those in Africa and in Guyana, if we take that as an example, we are now exploring our fossil fuels. Do we just stop and say that, well, we are going through carbon decarbonization. So every fossil fuel, gas, oil, or coal should be stopped. And now we also have to be aware of the global geopolitics that is going on. The first issue, certainly, without a doubt, was the environmental consideration. We all agreed with that there certainly are environmental consequences that we have to be aware of. But then there's energy security. Energy security varies from country to country and from continent to continent. We've got to be aware of that as well. Then for Africa, one key issue that came up was capital investments for the requisite infrastructure. If you go, say, to IFC or you go to the World Bank, and we are having issues securing financing for this infrastructure because they are not carbon friendly, where do we go? Absolutely, we have to look within the continent for our own financing. And there is financing within the continent. So that is something that also came through. And I'm talking about the entire value chain, right from the upstream, midstream, and downstream. The fourth point was intellectual capital. Look, we cannot be dependent on others to actually build our industry for us. So we have to accelerate the intellectual capital for us to be able to man this industry upstream, midstream, and downstream. That goes without saying, or else we will just be where we are. The last but not the least point that has come up through Vancouver is we also have to be mindful, country by country, of both the economic and social impact. So it goes without saying, the transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy, or less impactful. When I say less impactful, I'm talking about the impact of carbon, and in particular CO2. There isn't a fixed date. And those here in Vancouver would tell you that really depending on the fuel type and the location, we are in for a transition that does not have a fixed boundary condition in terms of the upper limit. That is where I will end. And when I get more news, I certainly will come to Ghana and share with you. Thank you.
Great, Dr. Santi. Thank you very much for that intervention and for sharing those critical points that have come up in your conference in Vancouver. It's a shame that we haven't been able to, in our discussion, go deeply into the issues of the transition. I know that Guyana is net zero at the moment, but we would like to look at what the focus is for both countries as we seek to industrialize in this sector, what the focus is going to be, given the very burning issues on sustainability. But I'm happy to say that this webinar is just a precursor to a bigger local content conference that's going to be over a whole 2 days in August. And we'll be sharing some information on that in the concluding remarks. So thanks for that, but we'll go straight to the Q&A because our attendees have been very active. We've got a lot of questions and we won't be able to take them all, but I promise that we would have our speakers respond to the questions when we are done. So we send those answers out to those who've asked questions. I have to ask this question first because it was the very first question that we received from Frank. Frank is asking, are Ghana and Guyana considering the execution of a tax treaty? This will ensure that Ghanaians doing business in Guyana will not be subjected to double taxation, and same will hold true for Guyanese doing business in Ghana. And he thanks you all for your excellent presentations. I think Egbert or Bobby, which of you would like to take this?
Okay, so from Ghana or the petroleum company, I think that is a very important question. Taxation, as we all know, very important in business and in international business. Fortunately for both countries, we signed a technical cooperation agreement. And I know that there is a desk at office of the Vice President of the Republic of Ghana that's keeping an eye on our engagements with Ghana. I will escalate this, suggestion to that desk and see to it that immediately something like this is done, because it makes a lot of sense to at least begin talking about a double taxation arrangement, so that as we do this, the last time I was in Georgetown on the back of this same technical cooperation agreement, I mentioned the fact that we should begin looking at the possibilities. A company like Tullow is very much, I think, present in Guyana. Now, what does this portend for indigenous Ghanaian businesses? If you're already working in Ghana for Tullow, under a strategic alliance arrangement, you can easily be taken from Ghana by Tullow to go and partner with an indigenous company or a JV in Guyana to do similar work you are doing in Ghana for Tullow in Guyana. And so this double taxation arrangement really makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's a question in the right direction. Fortunately, Bobby also works with the ministry in the Ministry of Natural Resources in Guyana. And we are in contact every now and then. So I'm sure at our level, we can also take it up so that we can do possibly a joint paper for the attention of both governments, and then we can take it forward.
Thank you, Egbert. There's another question from Satish. Satish is saying, we are a medium-sized engineering and EPC company. We need to know how to locate potential collaborators. Also, Prof talked of forums for this, how to contact them. I think on the question of forums and how to locate potential collaborators, a good place to start would be to attend the local content conference.
Yeah, sorry, I think it cut for a second. Could the question be repeated?
Right, so the question was he's asking about the social license and whether Guyana has had some backlash from communities. Yes.
So the thing is that I'll speak for our project. We have not had a backlash from the community, but that is, I think, a result of our strategy of how we've gone into the community and things that we are looking to do in collaboration with the community. I won't speak on behalf of say anyone else and the projects they've executed, but in our case, I think what helped us is that the community that we're going into has traditionally been in the agriculture sector and is looking for opportunities outside of the agriculture sector. So that has also helped in terms of the context in which we're going in. So they're very excited to look for opportunities to grow their economic activities outside of just the agriculture sector. To be fair, we should compliment the government of Guyana for their strategy in diversifying the locations in which the oil and gas industry is taking up residence in Guyana. And so it's been a clear policy directive that you've seen from the government, where they're pushing oil and gas projects outside of just the easy to develop areas. And it's clear there's a long-term strategy or goal there. But I'll let Bobby speak more to it if he wants to add.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. We've exceeded our time of 1.5 hours, but I've really enjoyed the discussions. It's been stimulating, and I think it shows that there's so much more to discuss, which is why we need to continue this. So at this juncture, I'd like to thank you all, gentlemen, for your generosity. Thank you for accepting to come on board and for sharing such great insights. I'll now hand over to the chairman of the Ghana Chamber of Commerce, Guyana, who would give us the closing remarks. Thank you. Gabi Asare-Otredako, the chairman of the Ghana Chamber of Commerce, Guyana. Gabi, you're muted.
Hello? My volume, I've lost my volume. I hope they are not waiting for me.
We can hear you.
Can I be heard?
We can hear you, yes.
I think I'm having some connectivity issues. Am I the one?
We can hear you, Gabi. Please go ahead.
Gabi, you're okay.
Huh?
You're okay.
So, Gabi, we can hear you. So
Well, I hope you can hear me. I can't hear you at all, so maybe I should just speak.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Anyway, I think I'm supposed to be giving the concluding remarks. Okay. Well, first of all, we would like to thank the Petroleum Commission and also the Minister of Natural Resources, my good friend, Bertram Barrett. He called last night to say that he had a meeting with the president. And I was actually quite blessed that he didn't get anyone to deputize for him than our very good friend, Bobby Gosai, who is a very good friend of Ghana. And I must say that, so Bobby, we thank you so much for your great insight. And we also thank Nicholas. Nicholas, you still has a visit in Ghana. and we hope that visit will come soon. We thank, of course, Prof. Suresh for joining us. I know he was in his little cabin somewhere in Canada. And he just got back to I think, Toronto, and was able to join us. We are grateful. And we thank Ben Asante as well for joining us. I think for us, what we seek to achieve is that I'm talking about the Ghana Chamber of Commerce in Guyana, and of course the Petroleum Commission and our partners in Ghana. What we seek to achieve is to see how the two countries can learn from each other. One, relatively, we've had some experience. And in terms of, first of all, building capacity in local content. Now, we believe, from my experience, is that if you allow local content to gain traction in the upstream petroleum sector, it benefits, first of all, the government, it benefits the citizens, and it also benefits the IOC, i.e. the International Oil Company. Because what it does is that you see that sooner than even later, it becomes cheaper because you build a local capacity, and that local capacity then can play a big role in the sector. You don't need to bring in expertise from across the oceans. So it benefits not just the country, but also the multinational oil companies operating in the country. And I think that what we want to do is to see how Ghana can share experiences with our counterparts in Guyana, particularly in the private sector, facilitated, of course, by the Petroleum Commission, Ghana Gas, GMPC on our side, and also on your side, the Ministry of Natural Resources, the Local Content Secretariat, and of course, where it's possible, the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and the other associations that are involved in the sector. So in August, I believe August 9 to 12, we are having what we call the Ghana-Guyana Local Content Conference to be held in Georgetown. I had the privilege of discussing this with your Vice President yesterday. And we see this as in line with the cooperation agreement signed by the two countries in December 2021, witnessed by the two vice presidents, i.e. Dr. Barry Jagdeo of Guyana and Dr. Mahmoud Baumia of Ghana. And we think that we need to bring this to life. It's not just a document that was signed. It was signed because the two countries are serious in their commitment of working together, learning from each other. And we, of course, you could say that we are early starters compared to Guyana. But looking at the size of the industry in Guyana, there's a lot that we can also learn from you if we have that cooperation. So we look forward to that, and we welcome the one group which Guyana has embraced Ghana, and we will continue to work together. And for the Ghana Chamber of Commerce in Guyana, we are grateful to the Petroleum Commission first and foremost, and also to GMPC Ghana Gas for supporting us in line with the Ghanaian government's own commitment to supporting or cooperating with the Guyanese government, for supporting us in making sure that we can share our experiences and the two countries, and particularly the private sector of the two countries, can cooperate and benefit from this partnership. Thank you so much. And I'm very happy. We had over 231 participants. Sometimes it was even 300 on Zoom. I've seen that we've had 1,700 at least following us on Facebook. And I understand that at one point we're live on about 4 radio stations in Ghana. And in Guyana, I understand that the fellowship, and if you look at the questions on the Zoom, it looks like we had a lot of people in Guyana following this discussion as well. I can't hear you. I don't know what's happened to my internet, but I hope you can hear me. And Egbert Fable, my good friend, we thank you. Nicholas, we thank you. Bobby, we thank you. Benasanti, we thank you. Suresh, we thank you. Nanajwa, you've been such a wonderful moderator. I hope you moderate our relationship at home as well. Thank you so much. She happens to be my wife. I'm sorry, I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all. And on that note, it's a wrap. Nice having you all. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Like, comment, share, and subscribe.